some requests to do a review of some of our macro lenses. Some folks saw us using the Laowa 100mm 2x, and so we thought we would just let you guys know what we think of that lens, and also some of our other macro lenses, or just a few of our other macro lenses in comparison to the Laowa 100mm.
Is that the red dot, so that you know where to mount it, is nowhere visible on the outside of the lens. I have a visitor here who's yeah, so this isn't going to be an in-depth review of any of these, but just kind of a comparison of I guess the three primary macro lenses that I tend to use. We've got some others, but by far these three are the ones that I use the most, and kind of just my thoughts on the differences between them and why I might choose one in a certain situation over another. First, what lenses are we talking about? So we have the Canon 100mm macro f2.8 IS image stabilized version. Canon actually makes, or has made anyway, three different modern EF 100mm macro lenses. This is the most recent version. They also sell a non-IS version, and then you may be able to get a even older version, which is kind of a bellows lens that goes out like on eBay. Then we have the Laowa 100mm 2.8. This is a 1 to 2x macro lens made by Venus Optics. And then we have the Canon 65mm MPE 65 1 to 5x macro. So first difference, price. The Canon 100mm IS macro is about $900. Note that does not include this tripod collar. I use that a lot. We're in studio and sometimes outdoors as well. So if that price does not include that, you have to buy that secondarily. The Laowa lens from Venus Optics is about half of that at $450. It does not have a way to attach a tripod collar, which I actually would consider a negative for that lens. And then we have the MPE 65. It is around $1,000, $1,050, I think, right now. So the Laowa is definitely cheaper than these other two. The tripod collar on the MPE does come with this lens.
And the reason we like those tripod collars is, I mean, a lot of times for our macro, we need more light and we're diffusing flashed light. And that's a lot of times where we attach our diffused light, our diffusion material onto that collar. And we use it to stabilize. It's sort of like a tripod, sort of like to stabilize. Right?
That's right. I'd say two big reasons. One is the obvious one, which is stabilization. When mounting a lens like any of these on a tripod, it's better and more stabilized if you can mount the lens on the tripod rather than mounting the camera on the tripod. And then the second one is absolutely what Kendra said, which is that I oftentimes use these tripod collars with an Arca Swiss plate to attach flashes, diffusion, both, and so they can be useful in that way as well.
We'll talk about how we diffuse our light for macro photography in the future. That's one of the videos we want to do.
Let's first talk a little bit about the Canon 100mm IS. One advantage about this one that's immediate that the other two don't have is it's image stabilized. So certainly holding this, that image stabilization is very beneficial. Probably gives you 2 or 3 stops easy, and is when you're dealing with higher magnifications is very useful. Again, the other two lenses that we're comparing do not have that. So another advantage I think of this lens over these two lenses is the autofocus. While I use manual focus a lot, a lot of times if I'm hand holding something, either outside, I've got something on a piece of vegetation and I'm holding it in one hand, or trying to manipulate, something with one hand, and I'm holding the camera with the other, it's really nice to be able to have that autofocus feature. I use back button focus, so it's not constantly hunting and pecking, but it allows me to quickly focus in, get to that area I need to on the lens, and then I can just move my body back and forth to focus on these. That's a huge advantage over these other two lenses, in my opinion, because it's just easier to work with using that back button focus and having that autofocus. The lens element is at the front. That can be a negative in the sense that you can have reflections a little bit easier off the front of the lens. The Laowa 100 millimeter is nice because one advantage of it over the Canon 100 is that this is 1 to 2x, whereas the Canon is just 1x. So instantly you have additional magnification. It's good quality lenses. I'm not getting into the nitty-gritty of comparing the actual lens quality of all of these, other than to say that they are all good and comparable. If you want to get into the fine elements of that, then that perhaps can be a later video. One thing I don't like about this lens, though, is that it comes with a UV filter, and one of my first reactions when I got this lens was to take this off, because I actually like the lens being recessed further back. That means that you're less likely to get reflections with flash coming in. But I quickly realized a negative of taking it off in the construction of this lens is that it is the lens element, while it does not go beyond the end of the lens, it does telescope in and out within the barrel. And what that means is you're sucking in dust every time you do that. And that can get into places where you really can't get it out. So I've gone back to putting this diopter, or not diopter, but UV filter that, again, it comes with on there. I think they sell it with it for a reason. But I would consider that a negative to the design of this, quite honestly. So one other thing I wanted to mention about the Laowa 100 millimeter lens is when it's focused to infinity, that lens element is really recessed inside this barrel. And one of the things that threw me when I first started using this was you can get this serious vignetting on the back of your camera. But then when you pull it into Lightroom, we were actually looking at the raw image, the vignetting is not there. And I was like, what the heck? I've never seen this before. It's really weird. Because it's recessed so far in there, basically the camera is trying to correct for this vignetting on the JPEG preview, which is really what you see on the back of the camera. So the way to fix that, at least on the Canon 5D Mark IV, and I presume most other Canon cameras, is to go into Lens Aberration Correction in the menu, and then choose Peripheral Illumination Correction and turn that off or disable it. That is by default on, and that is what is causing that vignetting on the JPEG preview. If it doesn't bother you, it's not on the raw image, don't worry about it, but it was really bothering me when I would see the preview on the back. So just a little tip with using this lens. It is manual focus, so you have to, manually move it to where you want. That's the only option. But again, the 1 to 2x is a benefit over the Canon, just 1x. Again, also, this one doesn't come with the ability to have a tripod collar.
Would you like to talk about how it's difficult to mount that sometimes because there's no dot?
Oh, yeah. So another negative I have with the Laowa lens, although this is a minor one, and so minor I'm not sure why they did it this way, but is there's no red dot on the outside of this lens so that you know where to mount it. They do have one, but it's on the inside. You have to take the rear lens cap off and look in to see it. So I'm used to, when I want to quickly switch lenses, take this off, looking down, flipping around to find the red, and mounting the lens. And it's not there. I have found repeatedly when I'm trying to take this lens off, or rather put this lens on and taking another one off, I have found repeatedly getting frustrated about that. Seems like a super minor thing. I'm not sure why they wouldn't have done that, but it's also a big headache.
Messes up your workflow.
It certainly, yeah, it's very frustrating. I've thought about just putting a little dot with a paint of my own on the lens to correct that issue.
Do you know, do Nikons have dots on the outside, or is that something that they did because Nikons normally have dots inside instead of outside? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't have any Nikon lenses.
Well, if you know, you can put it in the comments.
Canon, has a red dot on the outside, only on the outside. Never even looked for the inside yet, but on the outside there, red or white dots, and I just find that so much easier in terms of mounting quickly, because you're not looking on the inside of the lens typically to mount, or you don't want to anyway. So the next lens is the Canon MPE 65. This is a 1 to 5x macro. It is a lens that was really the principal reason a lot of macro photographers went with Canon for a long time, because there just really weren't any other options for that kind of magnification with Nikon, for example. Now, Venus Optics, Laowa, makes actually some other lenses that allow you to get closer to that. They have a 1 to 4x, and of course there's this 1 to 2x. But for this lens, it's great. It is effectively a microscope. It does extend out. It is manual focus and extends out to 1 to 5x. It has a small lens element in the front that you can see there. One tip, this doesn't come with it, but is a lens hood that you can buy as an accessory, and is great for stopping reflections from hitting that lens element that's right at the end of the lens there. This is a difficult lens to use primarily just because of its magnification. When you get it out there to 3 to 5x, you're really talking about a lot of magnification. You really have to stabilize yourself, practice a lot of patience, and hope to have subjects that aren't moving too much. But lens quality wise, it is a soft lens. I think that's in part just because of the magnification that it allows you to have, 1 to 5x. As you get more and more magnification, you get softer and softer. But it's for anything beyond 2x, this is a good go-to lens for sure. So one thing to think about with these is minimal focusing distance. With the 100mm Canon, it is around 12 inches. You may think at first 12 inches, that's way out there, but remember that anytime a manufacturer reports a minimal focusing distance, they're talking about from the sensor, so not from the end of the lens. So when you're looking at a camera, you more or less know where the sensor is when you're looking at a camera, but you can tell when you're not sure by the 0 with a hash mark through it. That's where your sensor is. That's where that measurement is going to be taken. So it's 2 or 3 inches out in front of the Canon 100mm is your minimal focusing distance. The Laowa and the Canon MPE 65 are a little bit, at 1x, are a little bit less than that. They're around 9 inches or 9 plus. But as you magnify with each of these lenses, that minimal focusing distance becomes less. The other thing to think about when using these different lenses is the depth of field. You have to worry about effective aperture when it comes to these two lenses, the Laowa 1 to 2x and the MPE 1 to 5x, because your magnification is increasing. So the Laowa, if you have this at f16 at 2x, your effective aperture is actually f48. And that's because effective aperture is measured as your effective aperture equaling the aperture times 1 plus your magnification. So 1 plus the magnification of 2x, 1 plus 2 is 3, times your aperture of 16. That gives you an effective aperture of f48. And you can imagine as you get out there with the 5X MPE 65, it really you're really stopping down your lens effectively. So what this means is when you are magnifying beyond 1x with either one of these lenses, ratcheting out the lens, you're going to want to be opening up your aperture to compensate because, again, your effective aperture is really going up, or you're effectively stopping down the lens. And of course, the more you stop down your lens, while you do get greater depth of field, you're also going to get a softer image. So when you're using the MPE out to 5x, you should probably have it opened up to 5.6 or so, just to get a sharper image. It is a balance because some subjects you just and what you're trying to photograph, you need a greater depth of field. All three of these lenses can be used in combination with things like extension tubes to just give you increased magnification. Diopters like the Raynox diopter you can use with all three of these. But one other advantage of the MPE 65 that I have made use of is actually using it with a teleconverter, either 1.4x or 2x teleconverter will give you an extraordinary amount of magnification that you can still to some degree kind of hand hold, but you do need to be stabilized to try to photograph. But keep in mind, again, your effective aperture is going to go way up as you add on the 1.4 or a 2x teleconverter. So how do I choose which of these lenses to use? If I'm working with something relatively large and I'm needing to hold the camera in one hand, I'm not quite sure where the focus is going to be, therefore I want to use the back button autofocus, then I will probably go with the 100mm, Canon 100mm. If I can use both hands to focus, then I will go with the Laowa 100mm because I like that ability to have 1 to 2x magnification. We're still talking about relatively large subjects, but it gives me more versatility than, say, the Canon 100mm does. I will say that I oftentimes throw a 25mm extension tube onto this so that I have more flexibility in my magnification. But now that I have the Laowa 100 1 to 2x, I oftentimes use it as long as I can have both hands to work the camera. One hand to work the camera, the other hand to work the lens.
So recently you've been using the Laowa a lot. People have noted it in some of our videos. Why have you been using the Laowa a lot? Is it because you were just trying to get used to it, or is it because you're trying to photograph some smaller subjects, or what's the deal?
Oftentimes when I'm photographing, especially in the studio, I'll have a line of different size subjects ready to photograph, and I just want to move through those fairly quickly. Having a lens that allows me to shoot from 1 to 2x just gives me greater flexibility without having to switch lenses or add extension tubes. So that's why I've been primarily using it more for some things right now.
And you're using that over the MPE 65 because the MPE 65 can be quite frustrating. I call it a lens that you should only use in the morning because I need a lot of patience, because finding your critter and getting it in focus can be very difficult with the MPE.
Well, especially if you have it really ratcheted out, that's true. But the MPE 65 is softer than the Laowa. And so because I think the way that the lenses are built, this has the ability to go out to 1 to 5x that the Laowa doesn't. It just has an inherent softness about it that the Laowa doesn't. So if I don't need to go to 3, 4, or 5x, then this is a sharper lens, or this is a sharper lens. And that's why I would always default to them over the MPE. If I have to go beyond that magnification, then I'll use the MPE. Another big difference with the MPE over these other two lenses is that the MPE will not focus to infinity. It's a specialized lens. You could buy either one of these lenses and use it for portrait photography or other things. People do that. You can't do that even at 1x with the MPE. It does not focus to infinity. So that is, if you're trying to get into macro photography and really just wanting to buy one versatile lens, I always recommend people think about Well, previously I would recommend the Canon 100mm or the Nikon 105 equivalent, but nowadays I probably would recommend the Laowa because it does give you more magnification and it's half the cost. And again, it's a good lens in terms of its optical quality.
Okay, so we have our pink katydid here. So if you were going to photograph this little guy, and it's quite small, it's not huge, it's not a full-size grasshopper, but it's about the size of most beetles, which lens would you choose?
For that, I would certainly use either the Canon 100mm or the Laowa 1-2x. Either one would do really well with that. Again, for me, it would depend upon, for example, what I'm doing and if I am needing if I have my second hand free to focus with the lens. That's really what would decide it for me. And of course, I'm not walking around with both lenses out in the field, swapping back and forth like that. I just typically choose one. These days, because I've been using it more and I like the flexibility, I guess I have been using the Laowa 1-2x, but I will tell you I get frustrated when I would love to be able to, if I'm going from, say, something like that katydid to something half that size, and I don't have my other hand free because I'm holding something, I can't use I don't have it free to tweak the focus on this lens. I get frustrated and wish I had the Canon because I could just use back button focus all on one hand, refocus and get into generally the right area I need to be, and then just move my body back and forth. So but at the same time, I could be using this lens, have that ability to autofocus with one hand, but want to photograph something that's, a fair bit smaller and wish I had that extra magnification.
Historically, we would just add a Raynox or extension tubes onto the end, but then you risk losing your critter if you're walking around outside, messing around putting that on. So.
That's right. It's, again, a benefit is this is all built in. You don't have to do anything other than manually focus it with that left hand. So I like both of these as my primary lenses for I would say a normal macro, but when you get beyond 2x, then this is certainly, the MPE is certainly the go-to lens. Bottom line, I feel like they all have benefits, they all have detriments. And if you can afford it or you really get into macro photography, you're probably going to have situations where you would like all three.
Okay, so get a beer, go on B&H, see which one you want, or which one you want to add to your collection. And if you like this kind of content and want to be notified when we make more, you can like and subscribe, and you'll be notified when we make another video. Thanks for watching. Bye.
Bye.